What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the TDR Show. Kevin here. Jay's on IR again this week, but that's all right. The show must go on. So we're going to go our top 10 Dynasty buys out there on the Dynasty market right now. I'm going to be looking at players that could be league winners possibly. We're going to be talking some stash guys. We're also going to do a rapid fire segment, kind of talking about some guys here that you should be looking at their value. Can't go super deep in there. We'll be talking about buys all for an hour, but we'll be going to dive into that and strategy. We're going to be looking at strategy here. We're going to be talking about what you should do and how you should be profiling your league mates. And also right here, talking about player pick value and what you should be doing out there based on the time of the offseason. So stay here. If you're on YouTube, hit that like and subscribe button. I'll catch you after the intro. All right, let's start with strategy first. So we're going to be talking about strategy here. Now, this chart is something I'd like to show you. It's a cycle of pick player value. EK Baller put this out a few years ago. And while it's not perfect, it's a great just starter, right? If you're in the Dynasty, you're new, or even if you're kind of a seasoned vet, just understanding kind of where we're at in terms of who has the most value right now, right? So I circled where we're at right now here in January. Now, January is always a tough month because usually Dynasty leagues kind of die out. Some commissioners out there halt things, but if you are in a true Dynasty league, you should be able to still trade, right? Now, when you're looking at kind of like when you want to buy picks and when you want to kind of be neutral, we're kind of in that stage right now, right? You can still buy some picks right now. You can definitely go out there and grab some picks for trades, especially late first. I do think late first are available. Now, early first, those are tough. I would definitely look at this player pick value cycle here. Everybody knows as we get close to the draft season, and especially as Senior Bowl's coming around, right? Senior Bowl's in about 11 days-ish. The Shrine Bowl's coming out as well. We're writing big previews on that for our Substack. And with that comes buzz. And with buzz comes value. So those pick values are going to start going up. I still believe we're in that 1 to 2 range where if a guy that lost in the championship game feels like he's still a piece away, you could probably ship off a veteran for one of his late first, right? You can kind of attack it that way. But right now, you're getting close to that peak value of like hype season, right? Hype season really commences after the combine, looking at March-ish, 4 or 5 in that range. And then when you're on the clock, that's when it's most expensive here. But just take a look at this player pick value. Just kind of give yourselves, all right, where am I at? Where's my league at? And where does it go to? Now, the other thing I want to talk about is when you have a Dynasty league, I've written articles about this at my previous place, at Substack now. I've talked about it. You need to go out there and profile your league mates, right? The best trade you can make is for guys out there that love like the youth, right? Love the picks, love those veteran guys. Well, how do you know that, right? A lot of people just play blind. And really what I mean by this is you should be creating a spreadsheet your league mates. Put in there what trades they've made this last year. Put in there where they're at in terms of a league. Now, if you want a cheat sheet, dynastydaddy.com. I'm going to put it in the comments or the description below. You could click that and you get a profile of everything, right? And I don't even get money from them. I'm just hyping them up because I think it's a great product. If you go in there, you'll see all this. All right, this team needs this. This is where they're weak at. And then you can start developing a plan, right? Don't go into trading just saying, I want to get rid of this guy. I'm going to look for a team. Look for a team that really wants that wide receiver. Or go through your league mates, profile them. Hey, this guy only wants rookie picks. Oh, this guy only wants those veteran running backs. He's willing to take a shot on them. Okay, and then as you profile each league mate, you know where to go with your trades. You have a direction. You're not just shotgunning trades out there. You're basically identifying league mates that you know you could trade with and know what they're willing to pay. That will help you as you get into these Dynasty buys. Now, on top of these Dynasty buys, we're going to go through 10 of them. We are going to go quarterbacks as well and running backs. I know it's not in vogue to say running backs are Dynasty buy, but we are going to look at quarterbacks first. And again, remember, most of these players are guys that had bad seasons, right? Or just injured seasons or whatever that you expect or that we expect to kind of bounce back here, right? We're not talking about going out and buying Patrick Mahomes. We're not talking about those type of Dynasty buys here. So the first one I want to talk about at the quarterback position is Trevor Lawrence. Now, this is strictly, when you're looking at his Dynasty value, it's plummeted, not as far down as it has been. It's slowly on the rise. Now, that tribute to that rise has to be, they believe that new coaching staff's coming in, right? Doug Peterson is still there. The thing is not there, and they're still looking. At the time of this video, we have not know who that head coach is going to be. But now that Ben Johnson's out of the playoffs, there's been some buzz there. I don't know what the buzz is really going to be, but I think with any new coaching staff coming in there, I think that it's going to be an upgrade. I think that when you're looking at new staffs, and Jane Daniels is a perfect example. Now, I'm not comparing Trevor and Jane Daniels, but many were, questionable on Kingsbury there, and then with Quinn there, and all of those things. So I think whenever you get a quarterback, you're going to see a bump. Right now, he's quarterback 19 right now on Keep Trade Cut, and whether or not you use Keep Trade Cut is regardless. I think he's in that range anyway. When he's looking at all the dynasty startups and everything he's gone into so far, he's around that area. But they're going to keep him. He just got the massive deal. He's got Brian Thomas Jr., who everybody loves. People talk about Brian Thomas Jr. being a top 5 wide receiver. Evan Ingram is still there, possibly, right? When you're looking at just that look at that wide receiver room, it's okay. If they keep Kirk, they're probably going to add to that wide receiver room as well. They have ETN, they have Bigsby, excuse me. That offensive line is improving, has looked good there. I think their defense is going to improve, and they have a pretty high draft pick. And so these are the things that you're looking at with Jacksonville that you should be excited about, especially at quarterback 19 prices. Now, will Trevor Lawrence ever get back to top 10 quarterback value? I don't know, but he's probably going to finish higher than quarterback 19. I can almost guarantee he's going to finish higher than quarterback 19 next year as we move forward into this offense. So if you can buy him for prices where he's going around 20 to later and get him for those 12 to 14 prices, right? And you're looking at, hey, he could finish there, I'd be excited about it. Now, some of these deals out here, so this is a 12-team Superflex tight end premium settings here. Trevor Lawrence for Ben Sinnott for Michael Penix Jr. I would like Trevor Lawrence. If I can get Trevor Lawrence, I don't really like Ben Sinnott or Snot, however you want to say it there. I think that's a great offense to be in, but I'd rather have a different piece there. But I would still take Trevor Lawrence straight up for Michael Penix Jr. That's just where I am at in terms of dynasty and where I'm at with my quarterbacks. So now, would I do that in a startup? I'd trade back, right? If Michael Penix Jr. is getting valued higher than him, I would just trade back and get assets. And that's what you should do here. Trevor Lawrence for a late first. Again, the quarterback class coming up, unless you believe in Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, possibly Jackson Dart, maybe Quinn Ewers, Jalen Monroe, those type of guys. If you believe one of those guys could be better than Trevor Lawrence or has a better outcome, I get it. But if I need a quarterback, a late first, if you're one of those guys that's maybe going to lose a quarterback or you're really shored up at that QB2 spot, you really need that top, a QB2 solid floor-ish kind of guy, Trevor Lawrence is the guy to go grab there. Another one that I like here, Trevor Lawrence for Jalen McMillan and Bryce Young. Again, Bryce is on the come up. People really believe in him. Jalen McMillan as well. But how many times have we seen a quarterback have an okay second year and then plummet again? Jalen McMillan, again, we don't know what Tampa Bay is going to do in free agency. Are they going to bring back Chris Godwin? You can get Trevor Lawrence for those prices. And then Trevor Lawrence in a first for Bo Nix. Again, listen, if that deal is able to be made, give me Trevor Lawrence in a first for Bo Nix. I realize Bo Nix is valued almost a QB 10 on Keep Trade Cut, but at first, if I can get a first on top of that, I'm willing to tear down a little bit. Think of the bump for Trevor Lawrence there. I think Bo Nix maybe regresses a little bit. And then Trevor Lawrence for DK Metcalf in a second. Again, this is a super flex quarterback for a DK Metcalf who did not look great down the stretch of the season, and a second then throw it in. Those are the prices that I'm willing to pay for a Trevor Lawrence there. Now, next quarterback that I want to talk about is Dak Prescott. I'm going to keep talking about this guy. He's been hovering around quarterback 22 to 25 out there. His value's plummeted as well, but with Mike McCarthy gone, now a new coaching staff's going to be there. I think he's got a little bump there. And then always when he comes back out of the season, didn't have a great year this year. We know that, obviously got injured, but up at that point it was quarterback 31, 15.6 fantasy points per game, the 1,900 yards, 11 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Not saying he was great. But remember, in 2023, Dak Prescott put up 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. That's the Dak Prescott I knew. And when you're looking at this, he was a QB1 in that season, right? He was a top 12 guy. At QB 22 prices right now, looks like he's coming back off that injury. Looks like he's fully healed. They're going to upgrade that room. I think they're going to get another wide receiver in the draft. They're going to get another running back in this draft class or on the free agent market out there. I just think that he is a proven QB1 potential, right? And he's still young, right? When you think of 31 years old is not old in terms of dynasty, especially for quarterbacks. No matter who's running that system, he's going to be throwing the football. He's got CeeDee Lamb there, maybe Jake Ferguson or Luke Schoonmaker or one of those guys kind of pops off. Those are the types you're looking here. I think that he is a very solid QB2. Now, if you have him as a quarterback 1, I think you're nervous more about that, right? But if you can get him as a QB2, you're excited about his upside. I think he has a high floor and a QB1 ceiling at most times. Now, when you're looking at some deals out there for him, Dak and James Conner for Jacoby Myers in a 25 first, smash the Dak Prescott side for me. Prescott and Devonta Smith for Justin Herbert in a 4th. Again, That's a very close deal. If you like Justin Herbert a lot, I can understand maybe moving that way, especially if they're going to go in the free agency and go grab a wide receiver in the draft. But I like the Dak and Devonta, especially if I'm contending. I'm okay grabbing both those guys there. Dak and a first for Brees and a third. Again, super flex quarterback over a running back, and you get a first back where I can use that on one of these running backs in the 25 class. I would lean there. Dak for a 27 first. Again, that is risky because you got Ryan Williams out there. You got Jeremiah Smith. You got some of these great guys in the 27 class. But if you really truly need a quarterback, this is the price you pay, right? In Superflex. And then Dak and Njoku in a first for Jordan Love and Tank Dell. Man, smash the Dak side on this. Jordan Love is an overrated fantasy quarterback. And I would argue Dak Prescott is better than Jordan Love, right? From just a fantasy perspective. Don't go in those comments and yelling at me right now from an NFL perspective. But from a fantasy perspective, when healthy, with CeeDee Lamb and the offensive weapons he has, give me Dak Prescott. And if I can get Njoku, who's a buy for me right now, and a first for that, for a Tank Dell I want no part of right now with his injuries, I'm going to take Dak Prescott there. And I just think, he's a great buy low option. QB2 production for the next 2 to 3 years with QB1 upside. He's got to go buy. I know not a lot of people like Dak because he plays for the Cowboys. We know there's some hate there, but I still think that he's a buy in this format. I would go grab him for sure. Now, as we get into these running backs, as we talk about these running backs, let me start here because we get a lot of noise out there about should you be buying dynasty running backs. I think that when you're looking at I think a lot of people used to talk about like, hey, don't buy running backs because especially with the running back class coming, they're going to wipe out some of these values. I do think that there is value in going out and trying to acquire some deep shot running backs here, like Travis Etienne from the Jacksonville Jaguars, running back 26, and his value is at an all-time low, right? If you're watching on YouTube, you see that plummet that he's had there because when you're looking at what he's been able to do, right? He hasn't been a great running back. Travis Etienne has not been a great running back. Over 500 yards, 2 touchdowns, wasn't great this year. We know that. But when you're looking at this offense, obviously I like Trevor Lawrence. I think you can also buy Etienne here. Him and Tank Bigsby did split a little bit of time, but new coaching staff coming in. Possibly they look at Etienne and saying, hey, we're going to just give you the rock and you're going to be more of a pass catcher as well. And you're going to see a production bump, right? I still think he can be a solid running back too, right? I really, really do think he can kind of fit in there. And I think really what you have to look at from just a perspective. And he had over 400 yards from scrimmage in 22 and 23. He's a versatile weapon. 11 touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown in 2023, right? Last year. So he's had that. He obviously got back onto the Jacksonville Jaguars this year because of the 5th-year player option got picked up. But there's still a chance he gets moved, right? So imagine if Etienne goes, and everybody's going to talk about this, but to Dallas Cowboys, right? Maybe they don't want to address the running back room in the draft. Maybe they're going to try to get some capital back. And they just say, Etienne's our guy. We're going to go after him, right? Or maybe he gets traded, right, to another team. They're still going to use Etienne. I think there's value in grabbing guys in that 26, 27, 28 range at the running back position who possibly has some volume left. They could definitely produce out there and it has a clear path, right? I think Etienne still has a clear path. I like Tank Bigsby. I liked Tank Bigsby 2 years ago, but I still think Etienne's their guy. And I think even after next year, he's going to find a role somewhere else, right? Think of Najee Harris. Think of some of these other runners out there. I think Etienne can do that. And he's cheap, right? So Etienne and a third for Brian Robinson. I don't mind taking a shot on Etienne. If I can get a second instead, I would love that more, but I don't mind taking that shot for Brian Robinson. I like Brian Robinson, but we've seen Eckler there. We've seen Robinson kind of lose some carries there, a little banged up. If I can get some type of off-ramp, like a third or a second, I'm willing to take that risk there. Etienne for Michael Wilson in a second. Again, that's really, he's going around a second. That's really where his price is at. If you got to throw in a Michael Wilson, I'm okay with that if you believe Etienne can have some volume next year. Etienne for Jacoby Myers in a first. Now that one, I would take the first, right? If I can get some type of first for Etienne, I definitely would lean that way. I don't see that happening. That's a deal that's kind of a one-off deal that I found, but it's worth kind of kicking the tires on a little bit, maybe a late first, maybe. But again, I know someone out there is not going to listen to this. They're going to watch YouTube, see that trade, and not even listen to my explanation and drop in there and say, what kind of leagues you play in, right? Again, these are just out there. They're on Fantasy Calc. I kind of go through all of the different barometers out there to give you guys different options. And then Etienne for Tony Pollard. I'll smash Etienne side and just hope that he's Tony Pollard 2.0 26 years old, right? And just kind of finds that role for them. So that's the kind of running back that I think has value. I think buying running backs is difficult. I wouldn't pay for elite running backs, right? But I still think there's value. Look what Joe Mixon has done from the running back position. Look at what some of these other guys we're going to talk about here. Chuba Hubbard, right? Think of Saquon. Obviously, that's the big one. But these guys have been able to kind of produce out there. James Conner 2 years ago. You're thinking, hey, do I buy this guy? Do I sell him? People are throwing dirt on him. And then look at him now, right? So Travis Etienne, he's a value right now. Now, when you're moving on to the next running back, Chuba Hubbard. Let's talk about him, right? So he's kind of gone up and down this season. Really running back 15 to like 20 in that range in terms of where his dynasty value has gone. But the big thing with Hubbard, right? 1,100 yards when you're thinking of that this year from the ground, 10 touchdowns, 250 attempts. He basically had 1,300 yards from scrimmage and 11 touchdowns. He had 1 receiving touchdowns. Receiving isn't a big part of his game, but he can do it there. He finished at running back 14, 16.1 fantasy points per game. You have to like that. Now, he did get a little injured, grade 2 calf strain into the season a little early. But look at what Hubbard's been able to do and put out there, right? He had a backup CMC. Then he was competing with Donta Foreman and Miles Sanders. And he kind of just climbed. He was cheap last offseason because what did the Panthers do? They drafted Jonathan Brooks. And many expected Brooks to kind of be that guy midway through the season after the ACL. Well, what happened to Brooks? Towards ACL again. So Hubbard sees opportunity. And when you look at his workload, it's there, right? I'm not saying that, Brooks is just dead, right? I don't think that. But I think coming off of 2 ACLs, I believe in Hubbard the next 2 years rather than a Brooks. And with the contract, you got to remember that contract there gives him stability as a dynasty asset. And I love what Dave Canales has done in this offense. We saw him work wonders with Rachaad White 2 years ago. Hubbard is there. He's got the volume. He already had 250 attempts there. Now, you can't just say, oh, he's injury prone or he's going to get injured because you can't do that with running backs. But his volume alone makes him a solid running back 2 option, right? His volume alone is there. Now, will they draft a guy? I don't know. They have a lot of needs out there in Carolina. They might look at and just run it back with Hubbard and kind of fill in some gaps as they go. He could be their lead guy next year. So if you're looking for a solid running back 2 with league-winning upside, it's Chuba Hubbard. Can't believe I'm saying that, but it's the truth. And when you look at some of the deals out there, Hubbard for Chase Brown, give me Hubbard all day. I don't even know what Chase Brown's going to be next year. If what they're going to bring into that room, they could possibly, there's some buzz out there that they're going to bring running back help out there to Cincinnati, maybe in the draft. I'll take the chance on Hubbard there. Hubbard and Josh Downs for Keon Coleman, Cooper Kupp. Man, at this point, I would take the running back there. I think Keon Coleman and Cooper Kupp are volatile assets for 2 different reasons. Kupp looks like he's done, and Keon Coleman just, he's touchdown dependent, and I think he can get better with Josh Allen. But the way that offense works, I just don't see a ton of targets going his way. Give me Josh Downs and Chuba Hubbard there. Hubbard and T. Higgins for Devon Achane. Yeah, I'll take Hubbard and Higgins. I like Achane. I think that Achane is great. I know I'm an advocate preseason telling you to buy him. But if I can get a guy like T. Higgins who go be a wide receiver 1 somewhere, plus Hubbard who gives me running back 2 volume, I'll take that all day. And then you got Chuba Hubbard for a late 25 first. Again, that's kind of when you think of it is kind of what the value is going to be in terms of what you're looking at. But if you look at this running back class, I think it's a very tough question, right? If you're looking at the back end, who's going to be in that back end conversation? Is it going to be Judkins? Is it going to be some of these other guys that haven't come out yet? Or is Travion Henderson going to find himself there? I don't know the answer to that question. So if you want to re-roll Hubbard into a first, that's not a bad strategy. But remember, you might get stuck with another Trey Benson, another Jonathan Brooks with the injury, right? So I think that there's some question marks there with those late first. And then Hubbard for Terry McLaurin. And I think that's just a running back wide receiver question. I think tied to Jaden Daniels gives McLaurin a little bit more value there. But if McLaurin is your wide receiver 5-6, I think Hubbard it could be the option if you need that running back help. Now, next guy here, and it's not pretty, y'all. Like, so when I say this name, I don't want no trolls out there yelling about this pick because I told you this is definitely a buy for some guys that had good down years. But I'm going to say Ramondre Stevenson. I'm not giving up on this yet. Now, I was never a big Stevenson stan, especially when you saw like his value bump there. And he had a down year. Make no mistake about it. 207 attempts, 801 yards, 7 touchdowns. It was awful. Under 4 yards per carry. He did catch 33 passes, had 168 yards in the score. He looked good there. But, I mean, losing touches to Antonio Gibson's never great. But you have to remember this, too. He got that second contract. So the thing is, he got that large contract extension. So he's going to be there. So that gives me some hope that there's some stability there, right? But biggest question marks going forward. He led the league in fumbles. Not great. 7 fumbles out there. That hurt New England's offense. We've seen this. But Ramondre, from just a pass blocking perspective and a back perspective, we have seen him put up numbers. So I think this is one of those things where you think Mike Vrabel's coming in, new head coach. I don't know who his offensive coordinator is going to be. Maybe it is Josh McDaniels. Maybe it is someone like that. I just think Steven's going to get the volume. Now, I do see a lot of guys out there advocating for the Patriots, to really kind of go draft a running back. But with all their holes and their capital, I just don't see it. I think with Stevenson and Gibson being there, they're going to kind of ride that out for another year. And I think with a bounce back year, we could talk about Stevenson being a solid running back too. He's running back 34 right now. There is a chance for him to jump back up into the top 20s, right? Like he was early September when he had a couple good games. Ramondre is a pretty screaming buy right now, just based on what they're going to be trying to do in that offense. I think they're going to play around Drake May. I think some people are going to miss on this, but I think Vrabel's going to come in there. I want to run and pound the ball because he did it with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is a future Hall of Famer. Ramondre Stevenson is not. So there is going to be a little like, oh, well, he did it with Henry. He's not going to do that with Stevenson, but I do think they play through him a little bit more. I think they build that offense around Drake May, but I can see Stevenson being a goal line guy. I can see him scoring touchdowns at a high volume rate, and I can just see him getting touches in the red zone. So that's a positive there. Now, you're looking at what he's going for, Stevenson for a second, a 26 second. 26 class is not the greatest class right now. If that's a mid to late second, I don't mind rolling the dice there. For Tank Dell, give me Ramondre. I don't want any part of Tank Dell out there. Ramondre for a 2/3. Again, I'll take the risk for the Ramondre there. Ramondre and Xavier Leggett and Ramondre and Darnell Mooney. Again, I still think the running back that I want here is Ramondre in those trades. I think that he's the guy that could have opportunity and volume moving forward for the Patriots, and we've seen him do that. We've seen him be a solid running back too at times, and he just always got to get his volume up or his value up. And that's the thing too. Just because I'm advocating buying these guys doesn't mean you have to keep them all season or even all off season, right? We're just looking at it like, hey, I think these guys can increase in value. There is a dip, right? There's a dip. We're in that dip right now. Can I get him now? And it may be, he has a couple big games at the beginning of September. Maybe he shoots up a little bit. Maybe a guy really believes him and I can flip him. Right? At these prices, he's legitimately very cheap. And based on his season he had, a lot of owners out there might be like, hey, I want this guy off my roster. You might be able to get him for even cheaper. If I can get him for a third, I don't mind swinging, right? You got to take a risk out there in Dynasty for value bumps that you perceive. I'll take the risk there. Now, let's move over to the wide receiver position. So we're going to be talking about wide receivers. And first one I want to talk about is Chris Godwin. So Godwin has to be by far probably one of the most important targets out there in free agency. I know he's coming off the injury. Now, when you look at his numbers from a fantasy finish, wide receiver 53, 17.2 points per game. Now, that's because he got injured, right, through his 5 games. But through those first 5 or 6 games that he played, he was wide receiver 2, right? He had 62 targets in those week stands in that time frame. 62 targets. He led the league. 50 receptions, 576 yards, and 5 touchdowns. If he comes back, which a lot of people do, I think he fits right back into that. Him and Mike Evans being there. They have something great with Baker Mayfield in there. He's going to earn those targets. Go buy him. He has a massive value dip right now at wide receiver 39. Now, if for some reason he doesn't come back, there are a lot of wide receiver needy teams out there that could love a Chris Godwin, who's only 28 years old, will be probably around 29, right? Has 2 to 3 years, really good years left in him for just a possession guy that can earn targets. Think of Carolina, think of some of these other places that could really utilize his strengths. Maybe even New England, like we just talked about with Ramondre. Maybe they need a Drake May. Maybe they missed out on the T. Higgins sweepstakes. Or maybe he goes to Los Angeles Chargers. Then he's the wide receiver 1 for Herbert. There's a lot of different options out there for Chris Godwin. And I do think that you're going to see the value bump back up in between that September and November mark that you see on the screen there from the Keep Trade Cut. Go buy him. I love this. I love his price. I think he's a great player. I think he'll shoot back up. Think about that. He's getting valued at wide receiver 39 right now. But when he was healthy on the field, he was wide receiver 2 in PPR. Okay. Now, what is he going for? Chris Godwin for Tyreek Hill. That's a very I'm going to just tear down a little bit and hope Godwin gives me 2 to 3 years. Godwin and a first for Josh Jacobs and Josh Downs. Yeah, smash that. If you can get a first out of Josh Jacobs and then you trade Godwin for Josh Downs, 100%, I'm taking that side. Chris Godwin for Jaden Reed. There's a lot of Jaden Reed truthers out there, but if you saw him kind of disappear down the stretch, I would probably, if I'm a mid contender or retooling, I'd take Godwin for the next 2 years, right? Your goal is to win your league. I think Godwin gives you more of a shot to win your league than Jaden Reed for the next 2 years. Then you got Godwin and Miles Sanders for Tyrone Tracy. Again, I don't want Miles Sanders. So if I can get somebody else there, a second or probably a second, if I can get a second in Godwin for Tyrone Tracy, I would do that because then I would take that second and re-roll in the 25 running back class. That's kind of how I would look at that second. And then Godwin for Mark Andrews. And again, this is a very just a team dependent build question, probably. Mark Andrews probably sitting around tight end, I don't know, 8 to 12-ish in terms of dynasty rankings out there. So this might look like it's like kind of a really high, tier down to Godwin. But again, you're talking about perceived value. If you can get something added to that for Mark Andrews, I would definitely lead the Godwin train. But to me, Godwin just screams by just based on what he was able to put up when he was healthy, where he's possibly going to be when we're thinking about free agency, and just what he's able to do in the field. And he still has a window, right? We're playing Dynasty in the 2-year windows. He's still got that 2-year window. He's going to come back from that injury. He'll be good to go. And I think no matter the landing spot, if it's Tampa Bay or if he goes somewhere else, his value is going to immediately shoot up. I think we're excited about that value when he happens, right? When he gets that landing spot. And then you're looking at house money right now, right? You bought him at wide receiver 39 prices. He gets the landing spot people like. He's going to go up top 24, just like that. It's going to happen. Now, next guy's a guy that I, from a prospect perspective, wasn't massive on coming into the season, right? But Rome Odunze from Chicago. And if we're going to talk about why we like Rome, I think it comes down to, hey, he's wide receiver 19 right now on Cube Trade Cut. He's kind of held his value, but it has dipped a little bit since the beginning of September. And it wasn't for lack of targets. He had 101 targets last year, but uncatchable targets was huge. The offense was really bad. Chicago's offense was bad. First and foremost, it was. I do believe they move on from Keenan Allen. So that gives us Rome and DJ Moore. And I think Rome is going to really thrive in that offense, and especially if he's the number 2 option. I think Cole Kmet and these tight ends have taken a dip. I don't know who the coaching staff is going to be. I think the Bears are going to be interviewing head coaches for the next 20 days, probably. But when you're thinking of just what the perspective is moving forward of him, I think that they think that he's going to get a good a good coaching spot there, right? A new addition there that's going to really utilize him the right way. And I think that they look at it like Keenan Allen's leaving. Rome's their wide receiver 2 and could potentially become that wide receiver 1. To me, Rome Odunze is on the Jackson Smith and the Jigba timeline. Kind of had to wait, hold out, but he doesn't have a Tyler Lockett that's going to hang on. Keenan Allen's not that. So you're looking like an accelerated timeline. Rome gives me that, right? So some deals out there. Rome for Keon Coleman. Okay, I'll take Rome all day, straight up for Keon Coleman. Especially when you're thinking about, of those targets, he caught 54 balls, had over 700 yards and 3 touchdowns. So we see that with Caleb Williams and paired with him. I will take Rome over Keon Coleman. And then Rome in a first for Ladd McConkey. Again, love Ladd McConkey, but I do think they're going to add to the receiver room out there in LA. If I can get Roman Ladd, who's probably in a similar-ish tier for me, then a first added on to that, I'll take that all day. That's that tier-based trading. I actually wrote an article about that on our Substack this week. It comes out as this video comes out as well. You can look for it. And I talk about tier-based trading. That's exactly what I'm talking about there. Rome for DK Metcalf. Again, re-roll, get someone younger and looking for that wide receiver 2. I would take Rome Odunze over DK Metcalf right now. Rome Odunze in a second for Rondale Robinson and Zay Flowers. This is a tough one for me because I like both Rondale and Zay. But if I can get Rome, who perennially could be a wide receiver 1 in Chicago with Caleb Williams, plus a second back probably for Rondale, I think that's fair. I think Rome and Zay, you're going to find Rome a little higher in the tiers. Zay's close. Second for Rondale to kind of fill out some needs. I don't mind doing that. And then Rome in a second for James Cook. This is a tough one because if you're buying running backs, James Cook is a great running back to kind of buy there. But I still think wide receiver and a second because I can re-roll that second into another running back and get younger, right? And I get Rome, who's going to be 22 years old. So those are the deals out there for Rome. And I think just moving forward, the trajectory is up. I really feel like he is on the JSN kind of track where you're going to see him kind of assume that role earlier than he did. And look at JSN now. I was a huge advocate of JSN the last 3 years. I've talked about him being that wide receiver 1. He is the wide receiver 1 in Seattle. That's the guy that I think that you want. This is the guy, Rome, is the one that you want now, right? In terms of where we're seeing projection moving forward in fantasy value. Now, the last wide receiver I want to kind of mention here, I'm going to say Brandon Ayuk. And I went back and forth on who to add in this range, right? I was thinking Jerry Jeudy. I was thinking some other guys. But Ayuk, I think people think Ayuk is dead. And he's not dead, right? His value is dead. I mean, he's sitting there at wide receiver 29. And he was probably at wide receiver 10 preseason. But you got to remember, last year, 2023, second highest graded wide receiver in NFL, right? One of 8 wide receivers to average over 3.00 yards per route run. and over 400 routes in a season, right? He was fantastic last year. Remember, he's only 26 years old. So, and he just signed a massive contract. So he's still on the 49ers, right? Debo is not a great wide receiver right now. I don't think Debo is going to be on this roster. He has looked bad. He's looked old. He's looked slow. CMC, what is that moving forward, right? What's that workload going to be? And Kittle is getting older. I know Juwan Jennings had a good year, but let's be real. Brandon Ayuk is their guy. Brandon Ayuk is their wide receiver 1. Brandon Ayuk is going for wide receiver 29 prices right now. So for me, I'm taking Brandon Ayuk. I think that from just a fantasy perspective, I know he didn't produce this year. 25 catches, 374 yards, then he tore his ACL. However, from a fantasy perspective next year, I think Brandon Ayuk's value is going to definitely double up. And I think you're looking at a top 12 guy again, especially in that offense that's going to have less weapons, especially with Debo not looking great, especially with CMC, what's going on there. And again, like I just said, Kittle's getting older. I think Brandon Ayuk is that buy for me. Now, what is he going for out there? Late 25 first? I'll roll the dice there. Outside the top 3 or 4 receivers, if you really truly need a receiver and you're a contender, Brandon Ayuk is a great get. Brandon Ayuk for Tyjae Spears and Josh Downs. Yeah, Ayuk all day there. Brandon Ayuk and Josh Downs for Devonta Smith. Again, I like Devonta, but if I can get Ayuk plus another asset, I don't mind that. I think Ayuk and Devonta should be closer in tiers than they are, but I probably wouldn't go after Josh Downs. I think that for me, I need to see what that Colts offense is going to look like before I truly believe in Josh Downs. I know he had some spike weeks this last year, but if I can get some type of other asset for Devonta, I would definitely do that. Ayuk for Mark Andrews. Again, I think I lean the wide receiver in this format. And Ayuk in a second for Chase Brown in a third. Smash that too. I don't know what. There are some Chase Brown truthers out there. And I know he had a good stretch of the run at the end of the year last year. And he looked good from a fantasy perspective. But you trade for the wide receiver. Brandon Ayuk is that guy that you trade for. And especially with these prices here. And I think that when you're looking at it, you could probably get Ayuk on a team where he's your wide receiver 3-4. And he gives you top 12 production. That's how you win leagues. To me, Ayuk can be definitely a league winner next year. Of all these guys that are not quarterbacks, Ayuk is probably the one that I'm like, hey, him and Godwin are the 2 guys that I think coming off the injury that you could really get some injury depreciated prices right now. Even now, right? We're talking January, and go grab them and go put them on your roster, plug and play, and then you're there, right? Even if, and especially if he is your wide receiver 3 or 4, right? If he's a depth piece and he comes back on the injury a little slower than we like, but he still performs down the middle of the stretch of the season, he's a league winner. So Ayuk to me is definitely one of those guys that you go buy 100%. Now we're going to go tight end. Before I show this tight end, I want everybody to know that it paid me to put this tight end back on Dynasty Buys. But I don't want you to click off right away, okay? So let's just talk about Kyle Pitts. Okay, Kyle Pitts got drafted number 4 in 2021. We're going to do a little history here. Not great, right? I think that people thought, hey, he was going to be the unicorn. He had 1,000 yards that season. He looked fantastic. And everybody was like, oh, okay, Kyle Pitts, he's here. Here to stay as Dynasty tight end 1. Obviously, we haven't seen that. This year, we saw him post a career low target rate of 17%. That's not great. That was 30th among NFL tight ends. I don't love that. However, he was 30th among qualified tight ends for targets at just 74 targets, but he still put up 47 receptions for 602 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was still there, and he did put up a career best catch percentage of 67%. Okay, so it was there. It was there. Then it just disappeared because heading into the bye week, Pitts was pretty good. He had 494 yards and 3 touchdowns in 11 games. So people thought maybe he could get up to that, tight end 10-ish, tight end 9-ish mark there. And it just didn't happen. And I think part of it was because with the Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix Jr., there wasn't a lot of consistency there from a quarterback perspective. So if he stays with Atlanta, then my hope is when you think of the quarterbacks that he's played with, Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke, Kirk Cousins, now Michael Penix Jr. Penix Jr. could be the first one that he's like with, and they have build up that chemistry and consistency. And I think that when you look at him, if he stays there, I still, obviously Bijan being there, Darnell Mooney looked great, Drake London was there. So there is going to be issues with targets, but if he's still efficient, he can still put up some numbers, right? And the other thing is too, people absolutely hate Kyle Pitts now. And I get it. He is a frustrating damn asset to have. And he's one of the most frustrating, probably dynasty assets I've ever probably had in my existence as a fantasy manager. But he's 24 years old. And I think that if you make the case for him from staying there, right? If you think he stays there, there's still an efficient option where he can still be a tight end 2 and maybe have some spike weeks. And with the prices now what they are, I still think I like the prices now more than what they used to be, right? If he's a top 5 guy, we don't like those prices. Now, let's give the other scenario. What if they move on? So we're hearing a little buzz right now. We've been talking about it, and when you think of it, they've been talking about maybe he's on the move from a just a trade perspective. Remember, he's 24. When you look at the free agent market, tight ends, it's gross. There's not a good tight end free agent market. From a draft perspective, you do have Loveland and Warren and Fannin, and there's some depth pieces there. There's guys that I really do like. However, okay, there is not a guy like Kyle Pitts out there. So when you think of it and you think of kind of what we have here, if Atlanta does move on, which they could replace him. Charlie Warner has looked great for them in terms of what Zach Robinson likes to do in his offense. And they've kind of done that because Warner run blocks, right? We know Kyle Pitts is not a great run blocking tight end. So they could move on. If they move on, Kyle Pitts screams Evan Ingram vibe, right? He just screams a guy like Evan Ingram who moved on from the Giants. Remember, people thought before Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram was kind of that unicorn. And then Evan Ingram doesn't do much with the Giants, and then finally gets a new home, and he became kind of a dynasty top 5 guy. I think Kyle Pitts could have that same thing. Remember, he's still only 24. He's going to start the season. Well, I can't really do math, but it's close. This year at 24 years old. So there's still opportunity there. And when you're looking at the prices, Kyle Pitts in a second for Mark Andrews, re-roll with Kyle Pitts and get that second. Get that off-ramp, baby. Get that second round pick, and you can still use it there. Kyle Pitts for a second for Dalton Kincaid. I'm not a big Kincaid guy. I think you could actually turn that into a first. I think you get Kyle Pitts and a first for Kincaid. If I can move off Kincaid for Kyle Pitts and a first, I 100% would do that. A second gives me a little bit more pause, or maybe I just go get another asset back, right? Rather than a second. Kyle Pitts for David Moore and Jerry Jeudy. Yeah, absolutely. Give me Kyle Pitts there. Kyle Pitts for Cade Otton in a third. Yes, give me Kyle Pitts in this range. And then Pitts for Luke Musgrave in a second. Again, I still think Pitts in that value range is a buy. And I think because of his age, because of those two scenarios, even if he stays with Atlanta, I think he's efficient enough to give you tight end 2 numbers. And he's getting traded as like a tight end, like a low end tight end 2. I think he still has upside as a tight end 2. And if he moves on to some new team, he has upside as a top 10 guy again, because I think they're going to use them better. And you got to remember, this regime did not draft Kyle Pitts, right? So when you're thinking of like this coaching staff, they didn't necessarily want Kyle Pitts. There could be opportunity for them to move off of Kyle Pitts. And if they do, another team will happily take his ass, because I think he's still a very good player. So to me, Kyle Pitts out there, it's not sexy. It's not great. It's not exciting, but he's a guy that you could definitely grab, add him to your roster. And if he's your tight end 2, you're pretty happy with that, because I do think that he can give you returns back in a position that if Kyle Pitts has 3 more touchdowns, he, instead of finishing as tight end 15 overall, he probably finishes as tight end 7, right? So let's look at it that way from a dynasty perspective. All right, last area here. We're just talking about some rapid fire buys. Let's just go quick. Joe Mixon, man won't die, right? I think he's got 1 more year of really good production left in him. I think from a fantasy perspective, you want to get that. I think that's a guy to go grab as a contender. Alvin Kamara is the guy. I mean, from expected fantasy points per game, he's up there in terms of a top 5 buy, right? From expected fantasy points per game, he's up there as a top 5 running back in PPR. That Saints team is a mess from a contract perspective. They're going to keep him. They got to use him. I think next year is a great opportunity to get him as a contender down a stretch. Trey Benson, I don't love this buy, but he's super cheap. I saw him go for a third in one of my leagues, and I was pissed I didn't jump on it. With James Conner still there, I still think there's a hit into that volume, and maybe they just gave him the contract because they don't like to see what they saw with Trey Benson. Trey Benson still ran a 4.3. He still was a very productive college player. I still think if you can get him for a third, that's worth taking a shot on. Demario Douglas, I like paired with Drake May. I thought they had a great connection down the stretch. That's someone that you can grab. He's a low end kind of dynasty stash type player too. But maybe he becomes like a wide receiver 3/4. I think his price definitely dictates that. Jatavian Sanders had a really good stretch, a rookie year for the Panthers, especially from that tight end room, especially with Bryce Young. I do think they add that wide receiver room, which could hurt his targets. But Jatavian, if you're looking for a very, very cheap tight end, that could be one of those guys that you add to your roster. Sanders is that guy. And I'm going to keep smashing David Njoku everywhere in terms of fantasy value, because I think that with Cleveland and all the different areas of need that they have, I have a hard time thinking that they're going to really run it back with an elite wide receiver out there. I think Jerry Jeudy gives them enough, and I think other guys are going to fill in that roster. They might go in free agency to grab someone. They'll probably draft someone. They were saying day 3 kind of draft pick. It's not going to be an early pick. I'd be surprised by that if it was. So to me, David Njoku is just going to eat and feast. When you think of all the targets that he's had, I love that. I love all the targets that he had. I mean, he had a couple 17 target games. He was phenomenal this last year. So to me, David Njoku is that guy, and that's kind of a rapid fire tight end buy there. So, hey, appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, thank you for kind of hanging out with us. Hit that like and subscribe button. We'll be back next week. Jay's going to be back on the show. He's just been on the IR for a couple of weeks here, so I'm filling in. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment. Leave me some buys here. Be respectful. We try to be respectful out here. But underneath, you can find a link to our Substack, our podcast. If you want to listen to more of these episodes on podcast, it might be a little easier for you. But regardless, we appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys on the next show.